They tell you 7 days can't change a life. They lie. Or perhaps they've never been desperate enough, disgusted enough with the echo chamber of their own mediocrity to try something truly radical. I called it my 7-day dangerous power experiment, not dangerous to others. Dangerous to the comfortable, complacent, fear-riddled imposter I had allowed to pilot my existence. This isn't a highlight reel of curated successes. This is the unvarnished logbook of a descent into the self, a brutal confrontation, and the emergence of something I barely recognized, yet knew was profoundly, authentically me. If you're here for quick fixes or gentle affirmations, leave. This is about what actually happened when I decided to declare war on my own limitations and systematically dismantle the prison I had built for myself. This is the story of forging power in the fires of discipline and self-confrontation. Day 1, the Covenant of Ash. It began not with a bang, but with a suffocating silence. The silence of unrealized potential, of days blurring into a monotonous landscape of compromise. I stood before a mirror not for vanity, but for an indictment. The reflection staring back was a stranger I knew too well, a creature of comfort, a slave to distraction, a master of excuses. That morning, the disgust was a physical force, a nausea rising from the gut. This wasn't just another fleeting desire for self-improvement. This was a survival imperative. The spiritual warfare they talk about, it's not fought in ethereal realms. It's fought in the 6 inches between your ears against the deeply entrenched programming of your own mind. I took out a notebook not to list aspirations, but to draft a contract. A covenant with the man I intended to become, and a declaration of war against the man I was. The terms were brutal: absolute commitment, no retreat, no surrender for 7 days. The penalty for failure: to consciously accept the life of quiet desperation I was currently enduring. I named the enemy, the inner critic, that incessant voice of doubt, the comfort demon luring me towards the path of least resistance, the procrastination parasite draining my will. This wasn't melodrama, it was strategy. To defeat an enemy, you must first name it, understand its tactics. The dangerous part of this power, I theorized, began here. In the willingness to look at your own ugliness without flinching, to take radical, terrifying responsibility. Most people spend their lives avoiding this confrontation. They build elaborate castles of denial. I was choosing to light a match to mine. The first act of this experiment was this vow, this brutal honesty. It wasn't about feeling good. It was about drawing a line in the sand, a line between the past and a future yet unwritten. The air in the room felt charged, not with excitement, but with grim resolve. The old self was already screaming in protest, sensing its impending starvation. This was the wake-up call, the point of no return. The mediocrity I had tolerated was no longer an option. It was day 1, and the battlefield was chosen, my own soul. Day 2, the crucible of unyielding will. If day 1 was the declaration, day 2 was the first bloody engagement. The theme: discipline not as a preference but as a fundamental law. The kind of discipline that shocks the system, that rips you from the warm, soft embrace of your habitual weaknesses. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations from a comfortable armchair. He wrote them from the front lines amidst chaos and duty. He understood that mental toughness is forged, not found. My alarm screamed at 4 a.m., not the gentle chime of a modern phone, but a jarring, industrial shriek I'd specifically chosen. The comfort demon was the first to attack, whispering sweet seductions of warmth and sleep. I rose not because I wanted to, but because the covenant demanded it. Cold shower, no negotiation. The shock was a physical exclamation point, a jolt to the nervous system that screamed, "You are awake, you are alive, and you are in command." The regimen for the day was Spartan, designed to starve the old habits and feed the new resolve. Physical exertion, a brutal workout until muscles screamed and lungs burned. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about demonstrating to my body that my mind was now in charge. Mental fortification, 2 hours of deep work on a task I'd procrastinated on for months, phone off, notifications disabled in complete silence. This was mental warfare against the procrastination parasite. Nutrition, simple whole foods, no sugar, no processed crutches. This was about denying the instant gratification the comfort demon craved. Resistance was immense. Every fiber of my being, conditioned by years of indulgence, rebelled. Headaches, irritability, a profound sense of deprivation. The inner critic was on a rampage. This is too hard, you'll never last. What's the point? Go back to what's easy. This is where most self-improvement journeys die, in the first fierce onslaught of discomfort. But the covenant held. Each pang of discomfort was reframed, not as a signal to stop, but as proof that the old structures were crumbling. This was the forge. The heat was intense, the hammering relentless. But armor isn't made from gentle caresses, it's beaten into shape. No excuses wasn't a mantra, it was the operating system. If a thought of quitting arose, it was immediately identified as enemy propaganda and dismissed. This day was about proving that my will, when truly engaged, was stronger than my ingrained weaknesses. It was about the raw, unglamorous act of choosing the hard path repeatedly until it began to feel like the only path. The intense motivation wasn't a feeling I waited for. It was a decision I made moment by agonizing moment. Day 3, Dancing with the Gorgon, the Embrace of Fear. Discipline builds the container, but what do you fill it with? Courage. Day 3 was dedicated to systematically confronting and desensitizing myself to fear. Not the fear of physical harm, but the more insidious, everyday fears that keep us small. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of discomfort, fear of the unknown. This is where the Stoic principle of preferred indifference meets the raw edge of personal transformation. The things we fear are often outside our direct control, yet we allow them to dictate our actions, to shrink our world. My target for the day was a carefully chosen gorgon, a situation that typically filled me with a paralyzing cocktail of anxiety and avoidance. For me, it was public vulnerability. I had a concept, a controversial idea I believed in, but it always kept hidden for fear of ridicule or professional blowback. The experiment demanded I drag it into the light. I arranged an impromptu online presentation with a small group of peers, deliberately choosing individuals I knew might be skeptical or critical. I gave myself minimal preparation time, forcing reliance on conviction rather than polish. The hours leading up to it were a masterclass in mental warfare. The inner critic was having a field day, painting vivid scenarios of humiliation. My heart hammered, my palms sweat, every instinct screamed abort, abort. This is the point where the break-free imperative becomes visceral. You either break free from the fear or it imprisons you indefinitely. I recalled Seneca, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. I focused not on the outcome, but on the act of courage itself. The victory was in showing up, in speaking my truth despite the fear. The presentation itself, it was imperfect. There were stumbles, awkward silences, pointed questions, but something incredible happened. As I spoke, fueled by the conviction I'd suppressed for so long, a strange calm descended. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded, becoming background noise rather than the deafening roar it once was. The judgment I had so dreaded, even when it came, felt distant. It couldn't touch the core of me that was simply doing what it felt was right. Afterwards, there wasn't euphoria, but a profound sense of solidity. I had faced the gorgon and not turned to stone. I had willingly walked into the arena of my discomfort and found that the lions were, for the most part, in my head. This day taught me that confidence isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to act in spite of it. Each deliberate step into discomfort chipped away at the chains of anxiety. The dangerous power was beginning to feel like the power to choose my response, regardless of the storm within or without. Day 4, the sentinel at the gates, mastering the inner citadel. The mind, that chaotic, beautiful, terrifying landscape within. Day 4 was dedicated to seizing control of this inner territory. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, wrote extensively about the inner citadel, that fortress of the mind that, if properly guarded, can remain impervious to external chaos and internal turmoil. This day was about becoming the sentinel at its gates, scrutinizing every thought, every emotion, before granting it entry. This was the deep dive into mental warfare against negative thoughts, the relentless inner critic, and the paralyzing grip of overthinking. The primary practice was radical self-awareness, coupled with Stoic discernment. I imagined my mind as a courtroom. The inner critic was the overzealous prosecutor presenting an endless stream of accusations. You're not good enough, you'll fail, this is pointless. Old limiting beliefs were the biased witnesses testifying to the critic's version of reality. My task was to become the defense attorney, armed with reason and Stoic principles. When a negative thought arose, for example, this experiment is too extreme, you're going to burn out, I wouldn't suppress it, nor would I blindly accept it. Instead, I would put it on trial. Is this thought based on fact or fear? Is it within my control or outside of it? What would Epictetus say about this? Often, simply holding the thought up to the light of rational scrutiny was enough to diminish its power. The prosecutor's arguments, so compelling in the shadows, began to sound hollow and repetitive. I implemented structured thought observation periods, sitting in silence not to empty the mind but to observe its machinations without judgment, watching thoughts arise, peak, and pass away like clouds in the sky. This practice, central to many contemplative traditions and echoed in Stoic self-reflection, cultivates detachment. You are not your thoughts, you are the observer of your thoughts. This realization is profoundly liberating. It creates a space between stimulus and response, a space where choice resides. The battle against overthinking was particularly intense. My mind loved to chew on anxieties, replaying past failures and rehearsing future disasters. The technique here was decisive interruption and redirection. When I caught myself in a loop of unproductive worry, I would mentally and sometimes physically, with a sharp gesture, say, "Stop." Then I'd immediately redirect my focus to the present task or to a constructive, solution-oriented thought process. It felt like training a wild horse, constant vigilance, firm guidance, and relentless repetition. By the end of day 4, the inner landscape felt quieter, not silent but less chaotic. The sentinel was learning its job. The inner critic hadn't vanished, but its voice was weaker, its arguments less convincing. I was beginning to experience moments of genuine mental stillness, a precursor to inner peace. This control over the mind, this ability to choose what you focus on and how you interpret events, this is a cornerstone of the dangerous power I sought. It's the power to remain an island of calm in a sea of turmoil, the power to direct your mental energies with precision and purpose, rather than being scattered by the winds of every passing thought or emotion. Day 5, the unveiling echoes of a stronger self. The relentless pressure of the preceding days, the brutal discipline, the confrontation with fear, the mastery of thought began to yield something tangible on day 5. It wasn't a dramatic, lightning bolt transformation, but rather subtle yet profound shifts in my internal state. This was the unveiling, the first clear glimpses of the inner strength that had lain dormant, buried under years of self-doubt and complacency. The dangerous power was beginning to show its face, not as aggression, but as an unshakable self-possession. The first sign was an unexpected calmness in the face of minor adversities. Things that would have previously sent me into a spiral of frustration or anxiety. A sudden change of plans, a critical email, a technical glitch were met with a new level of equanimity. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was that my internal state was no longer so easily buffeted by external events. The Stoic practice of focusing on what I could control, my response, and accepting what I couldn't, the event itself, was moving from intellectual understanding to lived experience. Then came a surge in clarity and decisiveness. For weeks, a complex problem at work had seemed intractable, a tangled mess of conflicting priorities. On day 5, looking at it with a mind less cluttered by anxiety and negative self-talk, the solution appeared almost obvious, a clear path through the noise. I made a decision, a bold one, and acted on it with a conviction that surprised even myself. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, just a quiet knowing. This growing confidence wasn't arrogance. It was a grounded sense of capability, born from the repeated small victories of the past 4 days. Each time I had chosen discipline over comfort, courage over fear, rational thought over emotional reactivity, I had cast a vote for this stronger self. Now that self was beginning to emerge. I found myself standing taller, my voice carrying more weight, not because I was trying to project power, but because I was beginning to inhabit it. An anecdote from this day. A sudden, unexpected leadership vacuum occurred in a community project I was peripherally involved in. A key organizer dropped out, chaos threatened to ensue, and panic began to ripple through the group. My old self would have shrunk back, overwhelmed, or offered hesitant, qualified suggestions. But this new self, almost without conscious thought, stepped forward. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a calm demeanor and a clear head. I asked pertinent questions, facilitated a quick reorganization of tasks, and injected a sense of order. People responded. The crisis was averted. Later, reflecting on it, I realized I hadn't felt stressed or burdened. I had felt effective. This was a glimpse of the unleashed potential. The power wasn't about dominating others. It was about mastering myself to such a degree that I could positively influence challenging situations. It was dangerous only to my old limitations, my old tendency to play small. Day 6, the unstoppable current, from motivation to intrinsic drive. If day 5 was the glimpse, day 6 was the immersion. The struggle for motivation, that daily battle to overcome inertia, began to recede. In its place, a powerful intrinsic drive started to flow. It wasn't the manic, fleeting energy of a caffeine high or a motivational speech. It was deeper, more sustained, a river carving its path through stone. This was the intense motivation spoken of in the keywords, but it felt less like something I had to generate and more like something I was finally allowing to express itself. The alpha mindset, in its truest sense, not about dominating others, but about leading oneself with unwavering purpose. The arduous routines of day 2 no longer felt like torture. They were still challenging, but the resistance had lessened. The 4 a.m. alarm was still jarring, but the leap out of bed was quicker, fueled by anticipation rather than dread. The intense workout was still grueling, but there was a grim satisfaction in pushing the limits, a sense of forging the self. The deep work sessions became periods of profound flow where the external world faded, and the task at hand consumed all focus. What had changed? The why had solidified. The experiment wasn't just an arbitrary set of rules anymore. It was a living testament to my commitment to self-mastery. Each action was an affirmation of the new identity I was building. The Stoic ideal of living by principle of virtue as its own reward began to resonate on a cellular level. I wasn't acting for external validation or to avoid punishment. I was acting because it was aligned with the man I was choosing to become. A significant shift occurred in my approach to a long-term, deeply meaningful project I'd always dreamed of but perpetually deferred, writing a book based on my core philosophies. The old self saw it as a monumental, overwhelming task, always finding excuses to delay. On day 6, fueled by this new current of drive, I didn't just plan it, I started it. I wrote the first 1,000 words, not perfectly, but with a fierce, joyful intensity. The act itself was empowering. The procrastination parasite, starved for days, seemed to have withered. This wasn't about becoming a productivity machine for its own sake. It was about channeling this emerging power into meaningful creation, into living a life of purpose rather than passivity. The transformation was becoming noticeable, not just to me but subtly to those around me. There was a different energy, a quiet intensity, a sense of someone who knew where they were going and was no longer asking for permission. I was becoming unrecognizable to my old self, and it was exhilarating. This radical transformation wasn't about adding layers. It was about stripping away the non-essential, revealing the core of steel that had always been there. The dangerous power felt like the unwavering momentum of a force of nature, moving with unstoppable, purposeful intent. Day 7, the reckoning, the true face of dangerous power. And so we arrive at day 7, the culmination, the day of reckoning. What actually happened after 7 days of this intense, self-imposed crucible? Did I emerge with superpowers, an invincible aura, the Midas touch? No. The reality, as is often the case with profound change, was less fantastical but far more significant. The dangerous power I had sought and in a nascent form found was not an external weapon to wield against the world. It was an internal realignment, a fundamental shift in the bedrock of my being. It was dangerous, yes, but primarily dangerous to my former self, to my weaknesses, my excuses, my comfortable cage of mediocrity. What actually happened was this. The unmasking of the true self. The experiment didn't create a new me. It stripped away the false layers, the conditioned responses, the fear-based persona I had mistaken for myself. Beneath it all was a core of resilience, rationality, and resolve I hadn't fully owned. The power was the courage to be authentic. The internalization of Stoic resilience, the philosophical concepts I'd admired, the dichotomy of control, amor fati, the virtue of endurance, moved from intellectual understanding to deeply felt practical tools. Life didn't stop throwing challenges, but my capacity to meet them with calm, reason, and fortitude had demonstrably increased. This is the essence of mental toughness. The liberation from the inner critic, the incessant, undermining voice of self-doubt hadn't been entirely silenced, but it had been demoted. It was no longer the dictator of my internal state, but a background noise I could choose to ignore or dispassionately analyze. Control over my mind, even imperfect, was a revelation. The birth of sustainable discipline. The extreme regimen of the 7 days wasn't intended to be a permanent lifestyle in its entirety, but a shock treatment. What emerged was a new baseline of discipline, an understanding that I could operate at a much higher level of focus and commitment than I previously believed. The no excuses mindset became less of a strain and more of a default. A redefinition of power. True power, I realized, isn't about dominance over others. It's about self-dominion. It's the strength to choose your response in any situation, the discipline to pursue your highest values, the courage to face discomfort for a greater purpose, and the wisdom to know what truly matters. It's an inner peace that makes you formidable because you are no longer easily swayed or broken. What actually happened is that I woke up. I saw the bars of my self-made prison and realized the door was never locked. These 7 days were simply the act of forcefully, consciously walking through it. The experiment didn't end on day 7, it marked the beginning of a new way of living. This dangerous power isn't a destination, it's an ongoing practice, a daily recommitment to the principles that forge an unbreakable spirit. It's the quiet earthquake that reshapes your inner world, making you an unshakable force, not by being louder, but by being more solid, more rooted in your own truth. It is the power to change your life because you have finally, truly decided to change yourself. This 7-day dangerous power experiment was a brutal, clarifying, and ultimately life-altering journey. It was a controlled demolition of a weaker self to make way for the foundations of something far stronger. The truth is, this power I speak of, this capacity for radical self-transformation and unshakable inner strength, isn't exclusive to me. It lies dormant within you too, waiting for a spark, waiting for a decision. The 7 days were a microcosm of the larger battle, the spiritual warfare against your own inertia, the mental warfare against your limiting beliefs. The principles are timeless, echoed in the Stoic philosophers, in the hearts of anyone who has ever strived for self-mastery. It's about discipline not as punishment but as the architect of freedom. It's about confronting fear, not to become fearless but to act courageously despite it. It's about mastering your mind, not to achieve some impossible state of perpetual bliss, but to become the calm, rational arbiter of your own experience. So what now? Do you click away, momentarily inspired, only to sink back into the familiar comfort of your current existence? Or do you feel that stirring, that resonant chord of truth that says, enough, I can't give you a blueprint that perfectly matches your life, but I can tell you this, the core of this experiment is universal. Declare your own war. Identify the weaknesses, the excuses, the comfortable lies that hold you captive. Design your own crucible, your own 7 days or 30 or 90 of intentional discomfort and radical commitment. Embrace the brutal honesty of self-assessment. Cultivate the unyielding will to follow through. Step into the void of your fears. Become the sentinel of your mind. Unleash that drive that you know deep down is waiting. This isn't about becoming dangerous to others. It's about becoming dangerous to your own mediocrity, your own potential for regret. It's about becoming so powerfully aligned with your true self that the old limitations simply cannot coexist with who you are becoming. The path to becoming unrecognizable to your past self is paved with no excuses, with intense motivation born from deep purpose, and with the mental toughness forged in the fires of self-discipline. The power is already within you. The question is, do you have the courage to unleash it? Your wake-up call is now. Don't let it go to voicemail. Begin.